Welcome, good morning. This is Mike Brazier from Gerson Relocation. We are a global relocation company and we run a series of these webinar and learning events throughout the year, each one covering a different subject. This one we are looking at and focusing on managing small and medium-sized global mobility programs. This is a furtherment to an e-guide where we have worked in collaboration with Deb Crouch Consulting. And if you're interested in that, then it's well worth having a read. But today we will be running through how to manage small and medium-sized global mobility programs. And with a panel, I'm joined today with Deb Crouch Consulting, who's going to take us through today. She's our Master of Ceremonies. I'm joined also by Gabor Bartos, who is Reward Manager at First Group and responsible for global mobility for a small program. We are also joined by Catherine Birchall, who is joining us from Sky, and she is responsible for managing a medium-sized program. So we have a lot of great areas covered here, a lot of expertise in the room. Deb herself has 30 years experience in terms of HR, tax and global mobility. Gabor has over 10 years experience working in Reward and running global mobility, as does Kat. She has over 10 years experience. She's come from a background where she's worked for VAT and PwC, providing global mobility solutions. So what I'm going to do now is, I think we're at the half-past mark, so we're going to get going. So I'm going to hand over now to Deb Crouch, who's going to take us through. So over to you, Deb.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning. According to the RES Forum, half of global mobility programs are classed as either small or medium in size, which is anything really between 1 and 250 live moves at any one time. Added to this, the majority of HR professionals managing small programs are likely to be doing so in an ad hoc manner and not necessarily plugged into support networks. So it's really clear that there's significant need to address and support this group of people. And whilst larger programs may resource internally and have clearly defined roles in global mobility departments, it's clear that smaller programs, the responsibility often sits with HR or award, maybe even finance. And so these teams face unique challenges as they also have additional responsibilities. It's something to add on to the day job. Yet, regardless of size of team and financial resources, all companies are subject to the same international laws and regulations, coupled with the fact that small programs often find the assignment lifecycle much more cumbersome and manual to administer. The cost of managing assignments plus the risk of the consequence of non-compliance could be felt to a far greater extent in organisations with smaller mobility budgets. So, turning first to Kat, you've managed mobility for a much larger programme at British American Tobacco and dealt with larger clients at PwC. Now you're at Sky with a new and medium-sized programme. What would you say, Kat, are the main differences?
For me, the coming into the medium-sized programme is understanding the infrastructure that actually surrounds the programme itself. So we've worked very hard, we have our policies, we've got our vendors in place, relocation, medical, tax, etc. But it's actually the day-to-day administration, the infrastructure that is around that caused me the greatest headaches from a day-to-day perspective. And what I mean by infrastructure is knowledge on the ground in local payrolls, setting up that shadow payroll element in those host locations, the ability to transport the assignees' email addresses and IT equipment, and everything is very individually owned by our entities because we are individual entities. So that, for me, in facilitating that and connecting all of those countries together, it has been, I think, the biggest shock for me and the ongoing day-to-day challenge.
Fantastic. Oh, it sounds a bit of a challenge. So I understand that it's a youngish program. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, no, so the Sky has been moving people around for a number of years, and realised towards the end of last year that a formalised programme was required. So we are just over 1 year old from November last year, and I joined Sky in June, and we have now transitioned from around the 20 odd mark of assignees to we're now just short of 100 assignees. So yes, so the programme has grown significantly over that period of time.
And did you have elements from the past that needed addressing? Was it like unravelling a ball of...
Yes, I think we referred to a ball of string in previous conversations. I feel like it is much more like a minefield. So yes, where we've had individuals being abroad and previous tax queries that are coming through from the authorities for payments of, for example, LTIPs 4 or 5 years ago, and unravelling all of that when there wasn't the structure or the awareness of those working abroad back then, but also transitioning expectations from the ad hoc bespoke assignment letters that were written for the originals to where we have a structured framework and policy and process today. We've got that awkward moment where we have assignees in the same location on different packages. Quite significant because the reality of cost kicked in, and people became aware of the hidden costs of mobility, such as that tax and social security requirements, and all of those elements. So yes, we are still unpicking today some of the historic assignees who are going to be on assignment for a number of years to come. So that will continue for a while.
So Gabor, you've run several small programmes at EMI and TJX, and having moved to First Group earlier this year, you're starting again pretty much at the beginning of First Mobility experience. What are the characteristics of smaller programmes, and what unique challenges have you faced?
Good morning, everyone. So yeah, the biggest challenge is that you pretty much always, or almost every time, you need to start from scratch. So it's almost as if it was a bespoke assignment every single time. And what's even further challenging is that there's a lot of interest and energy and hands-on involvement, so to speak, from the managers and from the business, from other groups of people in the company, because everybody's excited. Not a lot of people had an assignment before. Not a lot of people had any experience with an assignee or being a manager of an assignee before. So it can be really challenging to filter out that noise. So on the other hand, you are perceived as the expert in the company, and especially if you're a single soldier like myself, then they come to you for any advice, because you're perceived as the GM guy. So it's a very interesting dynamic, and with small programs, global mobility is often bundled into the reward role, or as you mentioned before, a finance role, or any other relevant part of the business. So time management is really important. I think it's paramount, and what I think is consistency, compliance, and basically a lot of structured common sense is what you find most important and most useful.
Okay, so Kat's managed mobility for larger programs at British American Tobacco and as a client-facing consultant at PwC. Now you're at Sky with a medium-sized program. What would you say are the main differences?
The main differences are so the infrastructure around the program itself. That was taken for granted for me with VAT, where there was a large number of assignees, but also dedicated individuals on the ground. So when you started talking about the broader elements of the programme surrounding itself, outside of policy and the vendors and all of those key elements, the shadow payroll setup or how expenses are claimed, transferring of IT equipment and email accounts, all of those elements, because Sky is individual companies, although we are under one umbrella, that is not connected. So the, as you mentioned, Gabor, around time management and the amount of administrative elements to monitor and stay on top of all of those smaller bits and pieces on top of the complexity of mobility, that's definitely been the biggest transition and I suppose shock for me. It is a little bit of a minefield when you're still learning and moving into new countries exactly what is available, what knowledge is there, and what you need to put in place.
Fantastic. So you said it's a relatively new programme, Kat. Have you had many challenges of working out what's happened in the past?
Yes, that's all unravelling. So that is still understanding some of those very early moves that we had, and where the knowledge of mobility was still very fresh to Sky, and working abroad in other locations. So tax queries on share payments, or where we have transitioned old policies to new policies, that is still all coming to light. And I think that is kind of a credit to the broader reward team that surrounds me in being able to establish relationships across the different countries, that those queries are being asked, and they are knowing where to come to solve the queries, rather than it landing in a slightly too hard bucket as well.
Yeah, no, that is often the problem. I think it's probably fair to say that there are challenges regardless of the size of the programme, but they manifest in slightly different ways. So, Kat, what drives mobility at Sky? What are the reasons that Sky sends people overseas?
I would say that we are very focused on expanding mobility program generally. We are very keen on developing our talent internationally and across the business with kind of domestic secondments as well. But the key drivers at the moment for us are job roles and gap filling, which makes it very fast-paced and immediate. And they tend to be our very senior population, and are on traditional long-term tax equalised policies. And then we have a complete extreme where we have a very successful finance graduate rotation programme in Germany. So they are 6 months to 12 months short-term assignees, and they rotate through a regular time frame. So we definitely have two scales, and they are our most popular populations, as it were. But I'm very lucky that I have a leadership team who are very invested and excited about expanding the programme to offer as many opportunities to a broad range of people across the business.
I guess no matter how small the programme, all businesses are held to the same level of compliance for tax and immigration. Gabor, how do you manage those areas of control at First Group?
Well, as you may imagine, it's mostly on spreadsheets, and with no advanced systems or technology to manage the assignees, developing checklists and tracker files is the solution, and these are the tools that I have at hand. But also the help of professional advisors on areas like tax and immigration, visas. It is also very important to maintain that level of compliance. Also, the education of business partners, and particularly HR business partners, is something that is really helpful in lack of technology. Just increasing that awareness in the business that how it is done, because as I mentioned in a few minutes ago, everybody in the business has some sort of a picture in their minds about how mobility works and should work, and we all know someone who knows someone who's been on an assignment before. So that's the sort of mentality that we a little bit need to override with that education piece, and also building the personal relationships with the leaders of the business to have an early warning if someone is planned to go on an assignment. And finally, the what we call the scare tactics, just to educate them to an extent that make everybody aware that as easy as and fun as it seems, there is quite a big restrictive and compliance piece behind that we all need to be aware of and need to abide to these rules.
I guess it's a fine line, isn't it, between enabling the business and supporting the business and being the guy with the rules.
Exactly. It's almost like you're ruining the fun for them.
Yeah, and scare tactics have to be real, otherwise, and rather than just theoretical.
Yeah, if you cry wolf that many times.
Yes. Oh, it's okay. They got away with it. Yeah. That's not a great solution. Okay. So how have you educated the business? What have you done to engage your business partners and the people in the business who are sending people internationally?
We don't have a lot of business partners, so I have the luxury to be sitting across from one. Face-to-face booking time in with them is what works for me, because we're in the same office. There's not much else to it. As I said, it's a personal connection, because we're literally in the same room.
Yeah. How does that differ for you with Cat, rolling out your new program and some of the rules and regs that you've put in place at Sky? What have you done to educate your colleagues so that they're not tripping off doing something that will trip up the business?
So I would echo that. It is just an investment of time to a degree, and for me that is just going to go and sit in different parts of the business where my BPs sit, which is physically different buildings or different floors. So whether I'm working up there, we don't have specific desks, we hot desk at Sky, so that's quite easy for me to do. But I have regular monthly calls with the teams in Germany, so it's just half an hour in the diary, and I will be online, and if anyone wants to dial in, ask me questions, case questions or whatever, they've got a bit of a dedicated slot for me, but also I do go out to the German and the Italian offices as well. So I would reiterate that it is just, like you say, that personal relationship. And for me, it's helped me understand the business a lot more, so that when I'm talking to a particular assignee and I know what their job is, or I can understand the project a bit better and the context, it allows you to ask the right questions. So if you know the complexity of a project, or it's a new venture and we're starting up an office, I do push a little bit harder and say, are you really telling me, is that realistic for a time frame? Is it more realistic to be 12 months and not 6 months? And explaining why it's important to set up that assignment correctly from the beginning. So that little bit of context does help me in that angle, which then helps me prevent some shocks and surprises down the line as well.
And are you finding your colleagues are compliant's probably not the right word, but are you finding they're listening to you and taking your advice?
In some respects, yes, they take my advice. Some of it is in the kind of the bar humbug bucket where they don't like it, and you're making it a little bit harder for them to do something. But on the whole, yes, they do meet me halfway at a minimum, and which is as good as it's going to get. Like you say, you have to kind of you tell them, and it's up to them if they listen and comply. But as long as you've done everything you can as a mobility manager to structure that as much as possible ultimately it is a business decision. But other queries that are coming out of the woodwork are landing on my plate. So I feel like the relationship is working in some ways.
Oh, that's great. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, Kat, Gabor mentioned earlier about spreadsheets and a lot of the systems at first being spreadsheets. I'm guessing that there comes a particular size of program where it's too big to manage on a spreadsheet anymore. What point did you get at Sky where have you looked at technology, or are you still in that looking at technology stage?
Yes, I'm very lucky actually. I inherited technology when I joined from my predecessor, and they put that in fairly early on in the process. So we're just finishing off the final parts of the implementation. So that's kind of been an off-the-shelf purchase. We actually use the ECA Enterprise technology because Sky used the cost of living data already, so it was an easy transition for a smallish program. And as part of that, we bought an off-the-shelf arrangement, which allows us, as I mentioned, with the decentralized structure that we have at Sky, to just have an understanding of where our people are and being able to track policy and timelines and dates and visas if needed, etc. And I think that key information, what I would consider core assignment information, is invaluable to us in that destructured or decentralized model that we have. The next phase is we're starting to focus a lot more on cost projections and being a lot more proactive about that cost element of it. That's the next phase. So, we're focusing a little bit more about the detail behind that cost projection. But we've done that. And I've always slightly used a golden rule, or kind of it's just a gut feeling when I've been managing other programs of anything between 50 and 80 assignees, I feel is just too many. I'm on the borderline of still being able to know all my assignees' names. And I think as soon as you start not knowing that for me is a very good inclination that it's just not manageable just through a spreadsheet. You need the automated element of that technology for reminders, for alerts, for date management at a minimum. That for me is where I would look to transition into technology.
And what point how many assignees did Sky have when you took on that off-the-shelf tech?
Yeah, they were around the including our Sky journalists, they were in the population of around 30 to 40 assignees. But because we didn't have any single HR solution as well, that was one of the decisions that they made.
Yeah. So Gabor, what limitations are you finding by using spreadsheets? Are you finding that yet?
No, not yet. No, we don't have that many assignees or active assignees at the moment that it would be difficult for me to remember their names.
Okay. So we talked earlier about where mobility sits, and in first group it's within reward. How does that relate, and how do you juggle responsibilities?
Well, I think global mobility is an important factor in reward and as part of the employee value proposition, but it has a different weight in every organization that I worked before, and it is used for different purposes. With this small program, or with a small program in general, it tends to sit with reward, and as such, it works better when it's centralized to one person or this one team. And if you have a dedicated person, this way you can keep the consistency. You can remember the names of your assignees, as it were, and then you can prevent yourself from reinventing the wheel every time you do an assignment or draw up an assignment letter, or just start familiarizing yourself with the person or the business need. But the need and structuring of the team, I think, it's really depends on that, what I call the critical mass. Exactly what Kat mentioned, when you can't remember the name of your all of your assignees, you did reach that critical mass already, and that brings in a lot of complexity, because with the small programs, it's that sort of what I mentioned at the beginning. It's almost like a bespoke assignment every single time, and there can be extremes. So as Kat mentioned, you can have 25 assignees, young graduates going on a one-size-fits-all sort of package, which is your critical mass, so to speak, or the other extreme where you have 5 executives with 5 completely different packages and 5 completely individually negotiated packages, and that is your critical mass, because there's a lot of complexity within one assignee that you can't really, keep on top.
No, so that's interesting. So, Kat, how many assignees did Sky have when they decided to appoint you or your predecessor for mobility?
So there was a dedicated mobility person at the point of the launch of the program. So they were very proactive in doing so. Up until then, it was kind of balanced between employee benefits and rewards and various recruitment and HR business partners in the various locations. So by the time that they launched the mobility program, they were already at kind of 10 to 15 assignees, probably more like 10 assignees actually, that were already active when they formalized the policy and they set up the structure. So from the very beginning, they had a dedicated mobility person.
That's quite unusual, I think.
Yeah, it is very unusual, but it was just one person. So all of the elements of it were managed by them, and they were actually based in Germany. So the Workers' Council in Germany, if anyone's got any assignees in Germany, was a big part of the setup and the structure. It was a big piece of work for that. But no, it's very unusual to have that mobility manager from the beginning.
So we talked earlier about linking in with the business, and I often see there's a difficult balance between supporting the business and being involved with moves at an early enough stage to make a difference. How have you managed that at Sky, Kat?
Well, we've been very lucky, I suppose, in different phases of that. We've had definitely buy-in from the leadership, which has been an enormous contributing factor to how that's all been connected. We have also had, I suppose, the financial support as well, which I think will drastically differ from many other programs. We had a central budget that was set up and to support key elements of it. So we've got those parts of it in there as well.
Excellent. Or you've started a programme pretty recently at First. What tips would you give for anyone listening who's in the process of setting up a new mobility programme?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, you can get very far with just common sense. So just don't be scared to start. It does sound scary, especially if you've never done it before. But at the beginning, it really is just structured common sense. However, you quite quickly come to realize that building a global mobility framework is not the easiest thing in the world. It's the more you know, the more you don't know, basically. And with good professional advice and a lot of GM networking events and webinars like this one, if you get the chance, just try and go. It is worth every penny.
People tend to be quite generous with their thoughts and tips, don't
Exactly.
they?
That's exactly where I was trying to go with this, that you can be fairly sure that one of these networking events and webinars that the GM community will come and help you. We seem to be like an extremely helpful and sharing group of people, and when it comes to sharing our experiences, we are helping out. I'm saying we as a royal we, because now I'm giving advice now, but like a few months and years before, I was completely new to this area. So I went to some webinars and I met some great people who are in this arena for 20, 30 years, and not only they're entertaining, but there's this plethora of knowledge and experience, and they are going to help you out. The other piece of advice is what I came across on my first assignee, is be prepared for a surprise when the first cost estimates for a move come in. It's eye-watering, the figures at the bottom of an estimate. It is a different figure that a lot of people, especially in the business, would expect to see.
Yeah, generally at least 2-3 times local hire.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Definitely. Okay, no, that's brilliant. Thank you both. So I think from our discussions today, it's clear that new and small and medium programs face different challenges. And hopefully what we've talked about today and the approaches taken by Kat and Gabor have given you some food for thought as to how to address mobility growth or startup in your businesses. Mike, have we had any questions that have been posted to the board?
Yeah, we have. We've got one here from Solmaz, who is asking, and this is an open question to Gabor and Kat, would you recommend paying in local currency on location at destination or host country, or from your home country? What's the recommended approach there?
It totally depends on the assignment and the country itself. So, for instance, in Venezuela, I would definitely not pay anybody in local currency, because by the time you the exchange rate and the local pay, it's already obsolete. But Venezuela is maybe not a good example, but we did see in Russia, for instance, 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago in December, a 60% drop in the ruble versus the euro. So we had some assignees who really were worse off, and the last thing you want is somebody going to a foreign country and be just worse off where in their home country they would have been in their home country.
Kat, what do you do at Sky?
We actually maintain in the home country, and we support with monthly bank transfers to the host country. So I have worked with split payrolls before as well. So if you were doing a balance sheet approach, which is, fairly a traditional way of doing assignments, paying a proportion of cost of living or however that's calculated on your balance sheet in the host country. I think there are broader parts of the policy to think about. So if you're linking bonuses to home schemes and pension requirements and other local benefits as a local employee in your home country, if that is all maintained to a salary structure and you remove that and pay it in the host country, how is that impacted? That would be something that I think Sky would struggle with. And then also the tax side of it as well. But yes, I've seen a more of a local plus approach with people who are paid in their host country. So a local host currency salary structure with extras in that local plus approach. That does tend to be a compromise between those assignment benefits that you get and the cheaper option of permanent transfers. So if you were structuring your policy in that way, then yes, that would be of benefit.
This one's from Gail. How do you demonstrate the value of assignments? This goes back to the balance sheet. It looks like a big number, but how do you demonstrate the value of assignments back to your business?
That age-old question of return on investment.
Yeah, I think it's always a sticky one, but I just wondered whether there was a different approach in terms of smallest programs to large programs, how we would approach this. So
from a Sky perspective, is we try to keep it a little bit simpler on that. So we do report to our European HRLT a dashboard of mobility. And that accounts for where our people are pending or up and coming moves, but also the number of repatriations we've had globally who are then still with Sky, who have been promoted since they've returned from Sky within a period of time, or who have been made redundant or resigned. So we do reach out to our local HR teams and ask for those statistics to feed into that. And that's where we say, right, well, we invested this much money, but then they came back and they resigned within 12 months. So what went wrong there? Or they came back and there was no role and we made them redundant. So we do link those bits together. And that's much more attainable for us, and it has a bit more of an immediate impact to the HR community. And then we explore, well, actually, we invested this much money, and go back to that cost projection, or if you've got an idea of roughly how much it cost, and then putting that figure on it, rather than saying, okay, they opened up a new business, and they so how much money have they made for the business? What was the structure? All of this, and then trying to add a number to that. That's just too much.
So it's taking learnings from how you've retained someone and help transfer those skills learned on assignment back into the business or not, and then feeding that learning back into your talent team or your local HR business partners.
Great.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's just much more attainable data for us.
Great. I would love to ask another question, and I don't know whether we have enough time, but I think just closing thoughts. Is there, running a small program, obviously you're doing a lot of different tasks. Is there anywhere that you would recommend that you focus your efforts just in the early stages?
From my perspective, developing your policies, just knowing what you want to offer in global mobility. It's where you want your program to go, and who is your audience with that program.
So the type of packages,
Exactly.
to think about that in advance.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Excellent. Kat, have you got anything to add to that just before we sign off?
I suppose I would reiterate the point earlier on the network. Something that anything that you do has been done before. It's not, nothing in mobility reinvents the wheel. It's just probably just new to your company. So do create contacts, networks, join various routes online to just get those snippets of information or ideas or a bit of a sanity check that you are probably all doing great jobs, but it just seems very overwhelming. But it is hard. It is complex. So yeah, the networks I would say are my absolute lifesaver, and I couldn't recommend them more.
Brilliant. Oh no, that's really good. Well, thank you both to Gabor and to Kat, and thanks to Mike for hosting for us. So the webinar today, as Mike has said, has been brought to you by Gerson Relocation in collaboration with me, Deb Crouch. We have a range of learning events and webinars and guides. And we also have an e-guide which has been written to support this subject. Again, myself and Gerson did that together. So if you'd like a copy of that, do look on either of our websites. We also have an exclusive roundtable event set for the 29th of January regarding VIP assignments, so keep an eye out for that invite. And once again, extend my thanks to Kat and Gabor for today, and thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you. And just one last note, we have recorded this, so I think this is a live event. We did hit a bit of a technical problem earlier. We apologise for anybody if you lost any of the recording, but the recording will, as they say, have additional content like all good podcasts do. So we'll make that available online and share that with you after this is complete. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been great. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Deb. We really hope everybody got something out of this. So great. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.